Right. Thank you very much. Thank you everybody for joining us and welcome you to the first Teams meeting that I've chaired on for Children's Overview and Scrutiny. I'd like to just do a few of the housekeeping things first. Please note that this meeting of the Children's Service Overview and Scrutiny Committee is being recorded by the Council for live broadcast and will be published on the Council website for a maximum of 6 months. In order to ensure the meeting is managed effectively, please could everyone follow these ground rules for speaking. Only speak when invited to by the chairman. Always turn on your video function when invited to speak. Your name when you speak if you have not been introduced by name. Mute your microphone when you're not talking. After the committee has heard from the presenting officer, the chairman will ask committee members who wish to speak to do so by utilising the raise hand feature on the bar at the top of the Teams window. The message bar, unless you are raising a point of order, please don't use the message bar. Can I just check everybody knows how to do the raise a hand feature? I see when you've got your hands raised and they're actually in the order that you've raised hands. So hopefully I can ask you to speak in the right order. If at any point you'd like to speak again, please use the raise hand function and try to remember to put your hand down when you've finished. If we need a vote, I will ask each member in turn how they wish to vote. Finally, please ensure background noise is kept to a minimum as far as possible and mobile phones and other devices are turned off or switched to silent for the duration of the meeting. Right, thank you. First off, I'd like just to say hello to a few people, welcome a few people and say goodbye to a few people. I'm not going to ask each person to introduce themselves separately, just a few of the new members. Firstly, I'd like to say goodbye to Julian Ratcliffe, who has been working with us at Children's Services quite a lot over the last year and a half. I know I've appreciated his work and his support to this committee an awful lot. I'd like to welcome, well, actually, I did welcome last time Elaine Redding, but unfortunately, she wasn't able to attend last time. Elaine, welcome. Would you like to say anything to the committee at all about Elaine?
Thank you. Second welcome, Chair.
Right, thank you. I'd also like to welcome Simon Mckenzie, who's a Special Education Needs and Disability Improvement Lead Inclusion and Family Services. It's his first time at this committee, so welcome. Simon, would you like to say anything to us?
Just good evening and welcome. Thank you for the hospitality I've received moving to Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole.
Well, thank you very much, and it's really good to see you here. We've got a few new committee members. Councillor Felicity Rice, Fizz, you are a new member. Would you like to introduce yourself, Fizz?
Hello, yes, thank you very much. Yes, you're right. I'm really looking forward to being part of this.
Oh, thank you very much. Councillor Roberto Rocca, I believe you also a...
Good evening, my name is Roberto Rocca. I'm councillor for Eastcliff and Springboard ward, and I'm already in Health, Adult Social Care Committee, and I'm looking forward to start with the new committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca, and welcome. We have Councillor Sandra Moore. Sandra, now a lot of you will know Sandra, but her role has changed now, so she's now a new member of the committee. Hello, Sandra.
Hello, yes, Councillor Sandra Moore, Canford Heath ward, and now a member of this committee, and looking forward to it. Thank you, Chair.
You're welcome, Sandra. We also have two new portfolio holders with us now. The portfolio has now been slightly split, so I've got Councillor Nicola Green and Councillor Mike White. I know both of them would like just to say hello and maybe just explain how their roles differ from before. So Nicola, could you go first, please?
Thank you, Chairman, and good evening, members. Yes, I've got a wide-ranging and a fascinating portfolio. Given the time at which this administration was formed, we were very keen that somebody should have a cross-cutting role in terms of the Council's COVID response and working with partners. So that's where my portfolio starts, but certainly not where it ends. So it starts with COVID resilience, moves through public health, and then there's a very significant part of it which relates to education, the council's role with schools, with place planning, with special educational needs and disabilities, and with further education insofar as we engage with that, and of course with adult education. So yeah, wide ranging. And I'm very pleased to be back in children's services. I can't tell you how much. Thank you for having me.
And Councillor Mike White, we all know Mike from before, but Mike, if you'd like just to introduce yourself in your new role, please.
Yeah, thank you, Richard. Just say a couple of words. I mean, formally speaking, I'm the cabinet member for children and young people, but in relation to what Nicola is covering, I'm covering things like children's social care, early help, the youth offer. I do have the formal statutory lead member role, which we're required to have as a council, and I look forward very much to working with this committee. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mike. I'd just like to say, just for new members, we do tend to use first names in children's services meetings. I hope you're all happy with that. If not, please do tell me. So I am likely to use your first name when I ask people to speak. If we go to the agenda formally, apologies. I don't believe there's been any apologies. Can I just check?
There's no apologies for absence, Chair.
Thank you very much, and therefore there's no substitute members either. Declaration of interest. Do any councillors have any disclosable pecuniary interests or local interests for the agenda? If you just raise your hand if that's the case.
Chairman, I have my hand up.
Thank you very much, Jane. I was just coming to you.
Sorry. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay.
So yes, Jane.
I just wanted to declare my interest in that I'm a governor at both Tregonwell School, part of the Ambitions Academy, and also the Bournemouth Collegiate School. And also in relation to item 6 on the agenda, I'm a bookkeeper for the Parent Carer Foundation, and therefore I won't be speaking or having any involvement in that discussion for item 6, Chairman, if that's okay.
Right, thank you very much. Anybody else? Just have a quick look down my list. I don't think so. So the next item 4, is minutes. Anybody got any comments on the minutes, or can we take them as read?
Agreed.
Okay. I can't see anybody raising a hand, so I will take them as read. The action sheet, now it's for me for that. I did have some communication from Eddie earlier on about an update of children's carrying knives, which he asked if we could update on this particular committee. Unfortunately, we didn't feel we had time to get that information ready for today. However, what I will ask is for us to have an update by email shortly, if you're okay with that, Eddie, as a reply.
Yeah, agreed on that. When you get the reply and update, that will be most in to put out to probably the whole committee, please.
Yes, I will make sure it goes out to everybody who's on the committee. Now, one note is one item that's on the forward plan going down to the end of the meeting, which isn't actually on the agenda, which I'll come to when we get to that point and explain the reason why. Now we have one other thing which I imagine a lot of you are interested in. I've made a note here saying it's the elephant in the room, the Ofsted report that I imagine a lot of you is on your mind. I know Mike did ask me whether we could also get that squeezed onto the agenda for this committee, and I've had some discussions about that, and I decided that it probably wouldn't actually be suitable because we wouldn't have any time to get any work done on it. I've asked, and Elaine is willing to do this, is for Elaine to make a statement about it. Also, I'd like to add that we've got a LIP working going at the moment, which purpose was to look at this area, and to a certain extent that work's been done for us by Ofsted and the improvement plan. So we're going to change, we're going to repurpose the LIP working group to look at this on that working group. So Elaine, could I ask you to?
Thank you, Chairman. I hope that you can all hear me, and apologies if my signal breaks up. I'm having a few troubles with the internet. Can I just start by saying that I'm sure you've all read the Ofsted focused visit letter, and in terms of the overwhelming response from both the service and from the leadership team and from the political cooperation across the improvements that are required, we are absolutely resolute in being able and willing to address the shortcomings. The difficulty with when you have such a hard-hitting focus visit letter is about how can you see the tree from the woods? How can you see that you can get from the position that you're in to good and outstanding services for children and young people? It is absolutely achievable with the determination that I know is within children's social care, the corporate team, the political commitment and the wider community that have also played a part in some of the improvements that we have started to make, particularly around the complex safeguarding. So I just want to be clear about the ambition and the appetite, and that we do not need to be concerned about our ability to be able to deliver on the improvements in a very short period of time. So in respect of the Learning Improvement Plan, the LIP, as the Chair referred to it as, it is actually now an action plan that addresses the 15 recommendations that are in the Ofsted focus letter. And in addition to that, it will be the transformation agenda that is going to bring about a significant change for children's social care in terms of modernising and bringing practice up to the forefront of the way in which we deliver our services. That's not to say that practice hasn't been a focus, but you can clearly see from the letter that that has got lost through being driven through process, which is what we need to reverse. We are going to put an end to drift and delay. You will see some historical references, some children and young people waiting for their forever families for far too long, years in some cases. We need better health and well-being support for our staff, notwithstanding the challenges in COVID-19, and you've got a report on that, I think, on item 9, Chair. And the change in culture to be more open and inclusive. And I'm sure that you will recognise the way in which we have reported historically, which has been data-based rather than qualitative-based, and that needs to be proportionately addressed. And it is currently setting us. We call them key performance obsessions, because we have 7 obsessions in the service that we are not going to move away from, which will deliver better outcomes for children and young people. And also being clear on the way in which we do our business and the way that we order our services. We don't have clarity at every single point of the child's journey, and that leads to confusion, and it can also lead to families and children and young people not feeling that they are being heard in the way in which they should be. These are their plans, these are their interventions to help them with what they want to be able to achieve within their family dynamics. It is not for us to prescribe that. And so it's a readdressing of the balance between process and qualitative, and making sure that the child and the young person or the family remain at the centre of it. I'll just say, Chair, what we're doing in response to the governance around with the Improvement Board. So we have a DFE advisor, Anthony Douglas, who has been appointed to support us with the improvement journey. That was negotiated before we had the Ofsted focused visit, because we knew that we needed to make rapid improvements. And so I am grateful to my corporate colleagues for supporting that, particularly the Chief Executive, because it is a very unusual step to do, to recognise that you need support early on so that you can get into a position to be able to respond to the focus visit and support families without having time to to deliberate on how you're going to do it. So I want to thank colleagues for being courageous in the space of doing something different in terms of the way in which we're responding to improvements. The improvement board, the first one will be on the 15th of December, and it will be independently chaired, as I said, by Anthony Douglas. That board will have regular update reports, and the reports will be shared with the Department of Education, but also a cross-party agreement has been sought in terms of the way in which we're going to offer assurance or not, and that will be part of overview and scrutiny's job to challenge on the areas that we are making progress on, and some of the areas that we may not be making the progress that we need to in the time that we have set ourselves to deliver on. This is not going to be a straightforward journey. There will be, it's a marathon, it's not a sprint, but we are required to sprint at one point because we need to make significant improvement in the first 3 months, and then a further 3 months and a further 3 months. And I'm sure you can get where I'm going to 12 months, and hopefully we won't have an inspection before our 6-month point. But that's not my gift. That's for Ofsted and our regulators to timetable in. The improvement board will meet every 6 weeks, and we will have internal governance around how we are tracking the improvements against the action plan on the 15 points as I've already set up. So I don't think, Chair, and I did see a hand going up, that there's anything else I want to say at this point. I just wanted to offer some clarity on our response to it and the service's absolute commitment to moving this forward. And it's not been without digging deep for the service in terms of the findings.
Thank you very much. Now, it is not an agenda item, so I'm not really going to look for lots of questioning. I saw, Susan, your hand went up and down. Was that just you testing it was working?
It is raised, thank you. Elaine, thank you. I did listen very carefully.
Yeah.
I, as a corporate parent, being a member of the council, just always look after the looked after children. You mentioned families. I felt that you were talking about traditional family groups, but can I please have something and a feedback about looked after children, because they are equally important, because we are all corporate parents as members of the council.
Yeah. Thank you very much for that comment. And Beverley, I think you've got your hand raised there.
I do, Chairman, thank you. I mean, there's no need for anyone to labour the point that there are clearly some significant failings here that put children in danger. The question I have is, when are we going to see something that looks like an outline plan and the work streams of activity that will need to be followed through? Is this at the 15th of December? Does that include members of children's services, or when, I guess, do we get to see a formal plan of action and exactly what those work streams are to be monitored?
Would you like me to respond to that, Chair?
If you could very briefly, Elaine, that would be great. Yeah.
So to answer your question, the 15th of December is where the action plan will go for official sign off, and then there will be a working version that will certainly be available to overview and scrutiny. And the board is officer and lead member and leader of the council is the primary makeup for that board, Councillor.
Right, thank you very much for that. Just before we move on to item 5, I've just had a request. Could councillors who have got video available, it's a lot easier for the public who are watching the meeting if you have your videos enabled. Otherwise, we just get these placeholder things and nobody can see who's there. So that would be very helpful to make it clear for other people. Graham Farrant. Graham, you've got your hand raised.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, it was only very briefly. just to emphasise some of the points that Elaine has made, and particularly the corporate nature of this approach. I think it's really important that we don't look at this as an issue within children's services. We say this is a council-wide issue about children's services and how we improve them in a corporate way. So Elaine covered a lot of the issues that we need to get on, but we just need to recognise that obsession with providing excellent children's services is absolutely where we want to be, and we have to make sure that's a corporate approach, not just a directorate-based one. So just wanted to emphasise that and emphasise the corporate support that Elaine's got in turning this round, and to thank councillors in particular for the political support as well, cross-party, to say let's get this right. To be honest, for our children's services, good is probably not going to be good enough for us. That's the aspiration. We need to push towards excellence. Let's get to the starting post first, and let's get it right in the short term.
Thank you very much for that, Graham. And I totally agree with you. Better than excellent is the minimum we can hope for our children, and achieve that. In that case, we'll go on to agenda item 5. Public questions. We've had one question from Susan Stockwell about smoking groups, or non-smoking groups rather, within schools. I imagine you've all should have had a copy of the question and the reply. If anybody doesn't have the question and the reply, please let me know. And I'd like to thank Susan for the question. Yeah, so I hope she's happy with that reply. So agenda item 7, requests for member public for scrutiny. Now, those members who were with us earlier on in the year, or the member Melissa Bayers asked a question to children's over scrutiny. We provide a response, but she's had some more contact with us asking if we could have a look at scrutinising one area of the service. You've all received quite a lot of paperwork on this. What we might is decide whether we want to bring this to scrutiny at a future meeting. What we have to do is balance demands of the committee, which I know is rather full at the moment. We've got a lot on for the next 2 meetings, and we've got more of the things that we'd like to add tonight. But if we do decide we want to do some further scrutiny on this, we need to decide exactly what we want to scrutinise, because I'm very keen on making sure that any scrutiny we do is focused and so we can actually make some difference. So I want to keep it quite focused. So I would say over to members, what is your feelings? Beverley, I think you have put your hand up. Yeah,
I have, Chairman. Thank you. Excuse me, I've got it on the screen in front of me as well. I think that the first question I wanted to ask actually was the context of the document that's been provided, the briefing to us. There is mention of the significant reforms introduced through the SEND Code of Practice. Comment. No, hang on, let me go down. Sorry, background. LGR work. There was a peer challenge or a peer review in January 2020, and there's a number of things mentioned in that. Obviously, this is only my third meeting with the committee. I haven't seen any of that. Has the panel seen this peer review? Presumably the place to start. If we don't have any of this peer review information, it's difficult to see how we're doing. I mean, clearly the information that's provided is pretty grim reading, to be fair, Chair. She's identifying a number of issues that I certainly think we need to look at. And a lot of those issues, from what I can tell, seem to come back to the introduction of banding.
Can I ask one of the officers? Is that possible to answer that point?
Elaine, are you going to answer?
I was going to invite Neil, but I can't see him. That's why I went quiet, Chair.
Okay, I can see Neil's face here, but oh yes, he's appeared.
Great,
That's where we go.
great,
Yeah,
thank you, Simon.
Sorry, Elaine, I think we were waiting for each other there. Yeah, so in answer to the question, the peer review, yes, it did happen in earlier this year, and the outcome of that, I don't think there has been a specific item on that at overview and scrutiny as yet. It's quite a wide-ranging review, and that's part of the question I think that members need to think about tonight. You'll have seen from the paperwork provided that there's lots of issues within this, and it'll be very difficult to do all of that justice in one meeting. So it's looking at one particular area. In answering Councillor Dunlop's second part of her question about banding, yes, that's particularly what the query started off relating to. Chair, I can talk about that and how it works now, or we can say that's one of the areas you'd like to look at for scrutiny in the future. But I do know we could start off by having a very long conversation about this, because it is a big issue and a very important issue, and I don't want to take over your whole meeting with questions about the way SEND is funded at this point, unless you want me to go into that detail.
No,
May I come back, Chair, so that it's not a lengthy, huge conversation? I think that's absolutely one of the places that we need to look at, the banding. I think we need to look at that, and I think that perhaps what we should do is have a look at these recommendations. Would you be amenable to me making a recommendation that we get this information together and bring it back to the panel? Or
well, I mean, what I would say is that banding is one of the issues here, and there are several other issues raised. I would like us to be able to move on with this quite quickly, because I know she has been waiting for quite a while to get this looked at. I'm just, if you don't mind, I'm going to bring Councillor Sandra Moore in for a moment, because Sandra has had quite a lot of experience with this. And just to confirm, yes, we haven't had sight of this at scrutiny prior to you arriving, Beverley. So Sandra, could you add in here, please?
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, this paper's got my paw prints all over it. So if I could actually just make a few comments. Melissa is quite right. The SEND service does need improving, but unlike some council services, councillors are very aware of the problems here, because our residents tell us so, and also because several councillors also have children with special needs, or now have young adults with special needs, or other family members they care for, and we've all been through the same sort of experiences. And if I could just explain about the peer review, which has been mentioned, SEND services were made a priority by the Health and Wellbeing Board back in July 2019, and a peer review was carried out in November 2019, and it was shared with the Health and Wellbeing Board, so the report is public. I don't know why it wasn't shared with the parent group, or it didn't come here. Probably because it was part of the Health and Wellbeing Board and they were dealing with it, but that's all changed now. Can I also add that to help drive improvements, other officer groups have been set up, and there's the SEND Improvement Board, which is independently chaired by an experienced member of the Local Government Association. So this council is very much aware of the need to improve the SEND service, and it's actually actively trying to drive the improvement. There's also a government review of SEND services, and I know that most local authorities have asked government for better funding, because current funding is simply not adequate, and that's where all the banding stuff comes in. But I want to stress that the dedicated schools grant is a ring-fenced government grant, and it's not part of any council's budget. And in addition to the funding, and this is very much a personal opinion, I also hope the government review is going to look at ways to improve what currently is, I think, a very adversarial service. It's both expensive and it's unpleasant. And I honestly think that parents have got enough problems without being put through a legal and an emotional minefield. And I also think what's also seldom mentioned is that all the special schools across BCP are Ofsted rated as either good or outstanding. And I think that good news gets lost when discussing service improvement. Also, that there's many mainstream schools across BCP which do everything possible to help children who have additional needs but who don't have an EHCP. And obviously this has an adverse effect on their schools' budgets, but they do it anyway because it's the right thing to do for their children. Making improvements to a service takes time, but this service was identified as needing improvement early. So I very much hope parents will soon be able to notice the difference. But I do know that this takes much more time than anyone actually wants. And I think as councillors, we need to continue to work with officers to help drive the improvement the service needs, and perhaps an update report could come to this committee. We need to do a bit more work on this, I think. Does that help, Chair?
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Sandra. That helps a lot. I mean, my thought, if I may just interject a minute, because we've talked about the banding and the funding, and my feeling was that we would talk about that quite a lot because that is very important and something that we've all got on our minds. With my discussions with officers and around this, several things came up that we might want to look at, and one term which kept coming to me was the term co-production. Now, I did a little bit of Googling on this over the last week or two and found out quite a lot of information about it, although it's quite a complicated term, and it's been mentioned in several discussions here. Could one of the officers just do me a favour and outline to the committee what we mean by co-production? Because first thing I looked at, it was told it was a slippery term.
I'll invite Simon Mckenzie into that one, Chair.
Right. Thank you very much, Simon.
Thank you, Elaine. So a pure form of co-production is that any strategic decisions or individual decisions around a family are made in consultation, in taking their views and them impacting on decisions. So you could say the fact that a member of the public is able to write to this overview and scrutiny and ask for a review is an element, is not pure co-production, but it is their opportunity for parents to raise issues for those to be discussed. So in a perfect world, you would expect any sort of policy or procedure or strategy within the council relating to SEND to be parents to be fully involved throughout the process and inputting into that policy, and hopefully agreeing with all and having agreement across the board. And then on an individual basis, if your own family, is there any decisions made around your children or young people's are involved in that decision and can say, well, this is what I want, what will work for me, and it's taken into consideration when any provision or support is made. So that was how I would see co-production.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. Beverley, you have your hand up, I believe, again.
Yeah, sorry, Chairman. I don't want to hog the discussion.
You're right.
Yeah, since receiving this, I've actually been doing quite a bit of research around banding and the impact it's having on the restrictions it's actually placing. I don't agree that it gives any flexibility at all. I think it has the opposite effect because it restricts, once a child's in a band, that it's restrictive about what they can actually get in terms of help and the recommendations. But this isn't the only, this isn't the only complaint of this type that I've come across since I've been researching, and I've come across quite a few parents who have this exact same experience. It's very frustrating. It does seem to be, and I get that this isn't intentional, it does seem to be as if we are doing everything we can to put people off getting what they should be getting for their child, what should be recommended, and what these children actually need. And I know from other research I've been doing, Chairman, is that we are going to tribunals and losing because of a lot of this, because we're not doing some of the work properly. So I think it probably requires a proper level of investigation, Chairman. And I'm not sure what your recommendation is, but I think it deserves a proper review. I am really concerned with banding. As I say, I've been looking at other areas. They are coming up with issues. I've seen examples of judicial reviews that are saying they're causing problems. So, I mean, I would argue that they need to be removed, but obviously that's just a personal view. But it does need a much greater level of detail, please, Chair.
Right. Thank you for that, Beverley. I'm just wondering whether you've talked about banding making things more restrictive, and the paperwork saying it makes it less restrictive. Could I ask maybe Neil to explain why banding makes things less restrictive rather than more restrictive?
Yes, Chair, and that's not to say I don't recognise the point Councillor Dunlop's making at all, but the idea with moving to a banded structure is it's less. It defines less strictly how the needs should be met and gives freedom for schools to work in a more innovative way with the total resource available to meet the SEND needs of the children within their school, and it breaks the link between a very particular definition of support and the child, and allows a more innovative and flexible approach. That's the purpose of it. It can be seen as limiting. I understand that, because there are clearly fewer bands and there's less. You can't be as each child then doesn't have an individual allocation, but it gives you a much broader and also flexible approach for schools to meet need, and is left defined. I think Simon might want to say something on the details of that.
Yes, thank you, Simon. Yes, if you wouldn't mind.
I would just. In some ways, you need to. What's written in the Education, Health and Care Plan is what matters, because if it's stipulated in a care plan that a child has, say, 30 minutes of speech and language, that has to be provided. The financial bit is really a discussion between the local authority and the school as to what should be provided. But for a parent, the fact that it's written in an Education, Health and Care Plan, it should be provided. And that's when parents can challenge the local authority and schools, but they can take the local authority to tribunals to argue that it's not being provided what's in the plan. So in fact, the banding system is I mean, I don't know how the history of here, but the banding system usually, rather than costing every child's provision, which is extremely timely and a bureaucratic process, this provides an easier way of doing it. It doesn't mean there might be issues about the bands and issues around finance and schools and the local authority, but the EHCP is what's critical.
Okay, thank you very much for that. So I'm just looking to see if anybody else is wanting to speak on this. I can't see. So my feeling is we have some agreement that we would like to do some scrutiny on this, but we haven't really got to the point at which we decided exactly what we want to scrutinise. I feel that the banding system is we've talked about quite a lot, especially with you, Beverley. And I see exactly what you're coming from there. I want to avoid the funding, because I don't see that we can make a difference on funding as a committee. We could make a difference on looking at the banding system, I imagine, and I imagine we could also make a difference on the co-production bit. Sandra.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. If I remember correctly, the banding system was the system chosen by the school forum, and obviously the school forum are largely comprises head teachers, and I think it was they who decided that they preferred the banding system. So I'm not sure that anything that we looked at would make any difference, because if that's what the heads want to do, that's what they want to do. I don't know. I could be completely wrong, but I can remember it was the school forum that chose that system.
Well, in the forward, can I suggest that as a committee we we decide that we do want to do some further scrutiny here, and let anybody disagree with me on this. If so, could you just make a note in the chat bar if you disagree with that as a thought? No, I'm not seeing any disagreement. In that case, I think it just goes with us to decide exactly what we want to do. Well, what I would suggest is if I talk to officers and put through a few suggestions, think about what we've talked about, email them out in the very near future, so that we could then get a written feedback an email feedback from you, and we'll make that choice from those suggestions. I've got some broad ideas here. So unless anybody has got any particular objections to that as a way forward.
Chairman, can I just say that I think I'd like to see those recommendations as well from that peer review, if that's possible.
I imagine that is possible. I'm looking at, because it is a public document, isn't it? And therefore getting it sent out to you, I think should be quite straightforward. And I said, Elaine, you've just, is that possible to do?
Absolutely, and I was going to offer something that might be fitting with what you're suggesting, Chair, in terms of there is no reason why we can't produce the recommendations and the actions from, as Sandra's already referenced, from the improvement board. So I think we can give you something to scrutinise that is more robust in terms of what it will provide for you to be able to discharge your duties in scrutiny. So absolutely, we can go further than just the recommendations, if that would be helpful.
I think that will be very helpful. So I'll leave it in that case. We'll have some you'll have some emails arriving in the near future with these, and if you feed them back to me, and sum up and let you know what collectively we have decided to do. And thank you very much for that.
Thank you, Chair.
So sum up and that I don't think there's anything else really to say summing up. So we talked about banding, we talked about funding, we've talked about the peer review and how that will be helpful to us. We've talked about how the educational and healthcare plan is the linchpin of this, and we've talked about the fact the school forum might well be the people that we need to talk to about the banding, and that we're going to do some more scrutiny, and that I shall be emailing out with the ideas in the very near future. In that case, agenda item 8, first time entrance to youth justice. So reducing the number of young people entering the youth justice system is vital to not affecting the life chances of some of our most vulnerable young people. I know a lot of work has been done in this area. I know the committee is very interested in questions, especially because it follows on from the youth justice plan that we had at committee earlier this year. And I believe David Webb, Service Manager for Dorset Combined Youth Offending Service, is going to present this report. David.
Thank you, Chair. As you said, I appeared before this committee in July to present our annual youth justice plan, and I was asked to come back towards the end of the year with an update on our performance on reducing first-time entrants. My report, I hope, is reasonably clear. I'll just give a quick overview and then see if there are any questions. The national data is what was included in the youth justice plan, but it has not been available since then because of the COVID restrictions, which have affected the Ministry of Justice's data reporting capacity. So instead, I've used local data for this report, and in fact, I've more confidence in the local data. The national data is derived from the Police National Computer, and we don't get to see which young people are attributed to our local area. But I'm more confident in our local data, and it allows us to differentiate between Bournemouth, Christchurch and Poole young people and Dorset young people, whereas the national data gives us a combined figure for our combined service. So the report sets out more recent information, breaks down the first-time entrants by number, by gender, ethnicity, offence type, also disposal type. So that means what kind of criminal justice outcome the young person received. And then towards the end of the report, I've summarised some of the actions we've taken so far and some of the actions we plan to take to continue to reduce the rate of first-time entrants into our youth justice system.
Thank you very much for that. Just let's have a look if anybody has got their hand up at the moment. No. Oh yes, Beverley, you'd like to go first.
I was holding back to allow somebody else to put their hand up, but I just have a few questions, if I may. Let's have a look. The 3 KPIs. This is just looking at the first KPI, isn't it? The entry into the system. Okay. What I first of all wanted to ask was the relationship between the tables at 5 and then 9 and 10. So we've got at the year end to September 20, we've got, let me see, 254. Am I looking at the right one? This is BCP, sorry, 294 across BCP. And then the other 2 tables below it, the one at 7 and 9, talks about 97. And then you've got the table at 10 is 163. So there's some additional items in there. Is that court orders as opposed to? I wonder if you could just explain the variances.
Yes, the table in paragraph 5 is expressed as the rate per 100,000 in the 10 to 17 population.
Yeah. All right. Yes. Sorry.
That's not absolute numbers. That's a rate. The table in paragraph 7 are the numbers of young people for each of the last 3 years, so that we could see broken down by gender. And then in paragraph 10, that's the number of offences. Some young people were responsible for more than one offence, so that means that that table doesn't add up to the same number as the numbers of young people.
Okay, at the risk of sounding stupid, can you just please clarify what you mean at rate per 100,000?
Yeah, so the national indicator, so that all areas can be measured on the same basis, produces a figure which is the rate of young people per 100,000 10 to 17-year-olds. So if you've got 100,000 10 to 17-year-olds in your area, how many of them have entered the youth justice system in the period? So that enables comparison between areas of different sizes.
Okay, how many have we got then in the 10 to 17? Obviously a lot less than the 100,000 because the rate's so high. Okay.
Yeah, I don't have that information to hand, I'm afraid.
Oh, okay. Chair, I have a few questions. Do you want me to come back and ask questions?
If you're okay with that, because I've just realised that the hands are going up slightly delayed on my system here. A few people.
I'm happy to come back.
At the moment I've got Lisa Northover, Mark Saxby, and Sandra, I think, have raised hands. So Lisa, I'll come back and I'll make sure to come back to you at near the end, Beverley. Lisa.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to ask about avoiding the criminalisation of young people and the use of the other methods which avoid going to court, and whether or not, because the bar is lower, whether or not people can in fact become criminalised. Because if you're caught doing something, say when you're 17, and then you go through that process where there isn't the higher bar to the amount of evidence that would be needed to go to court, you can effectively end up with a criminal record for something that would never have even gone to court. And as near as you hitting 18, which can just be a few months later, you could require an enhanced DBS check, which could then mean that you can't get a job already over something that would never have even gone to court in the first place. Can you assure me?
I think I can. Yes. the entering the youth justice system, in what that means is you've received a youth caution, a youth conditional caution, or you've gone straight to court. For the police to issue a youth caution or a youth conditional caution, they must have the evidence that could take that case to court, but make a decision that it's not in the public interest to do so. So it should not be possible for a young person to receive a youth caution without enough evidence that that case could have gone to court. And the decision-making process is that in all those cases, the police consult with my service, and we seek information from other children's services who know the child. So there is a kind of joint decision-making process. So that enables us to make sure that the evidence is there before a youth caution or a youth conditional caution is administered. And then what we try to do, though, is to, where possible, recognising what you said about the adverse impact of a criminal record in terms of future prospects, we try to use informal outcomes, so a youth restorative disposal, or now a youth diversion disposal, or even the police might decide that they can take no further action. So that would still require evidence that an offence had been committed before we would consider a youth restorative disposal. So the evidential test is still there.
Okay, and would a restorative disposal, that would come up on an enhanced DBS?
In some circumstances it could do that, and the disclosure of actual formal outcomes like cautions and conditional cautions changed on Saturday with new government rules, so it's not as automatic as it was. The issue with disclosure goes back to the Soham murders, and Ian Huntley, as you may be aware, that he was known to police forces but have not got a formal outcome. So there is, for enhanced checks, the ability for police forces to look for other information on their systems and disclose it if it's appropriate. If a young person had received a youth restorative disposal, which by itself indicates it's a low-level offence, that wouldn't, I think, be the sort of thing that would normally be included in an enhanced check.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much. That's exactly the question I was going to ask, to find that's clear. Just before Mark Saxby, I'm going to ask you next, but I just want to sort of make one point here, because when I was at my briefing about this and the data, the term was we were hiding slightly here, David, in fact that our rate, our numbers have actually dropped very much so over the last term, which I think as a committee we ought to note. Mark, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you. David, thank you for the report. I was interested, do we have any breakdown of the data in terms of the numbers of looked after children or children who are appearing within the system?
I don't have that information to hand, but I can obtain it. We just need to make sure we've got all the access to the information, which we do have, for each of the children, including if there's some young people that entered the justice system that we don't work with directly, but we should still have their information and be able to track if they had been a child in care or were a child in care at that point.
Okay, thank you. I just think what we've had and the duty of care we have to look after children, that their entry into the youth justice system needs to be tracked, and make sure that wherever possible we can give them the very best possible track through that system.
I agree with that, and we've now coming up to almost 5 years of applying a protocol with the police, social care, the youth offending service and children's homes, so that we don't criminalise children for behaviour in their children's home that wouldn't attract police input if it was behaviour by a child in a family home. So we've been successful at reducing call-outs from children's homes and other similar residential placements to the police, and we scrutinise every such call-out in a meeting, a group that meets 3 times a year. We go through every incident when a police have been called for behaviour by a child in care. and check that it was a suitable call out, and also assure ourselves that where possible we have not criminalised a child as a result. So we do have a decent system in place, which has actually contributed to the national protocol that was introduced in 2018, drew on partly on our local protocol for that work.
Good. And if you'd like to see the impact of that as in the data, thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I would like to sort of, because I have a question. I had a question on a very similar rate, and so thank you, Mark, because looked after children. Of course, we are, as Susan said earlier, corporate parents, and it would be really nice to know what the numbers of people, of children, are in that situation. I believe Sandra, I think you were next.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Well, obviously, I'm pleased that the figures do seem to be going in the right direction. I think my question is probably more for Elaine or Neil, but I know that the council has created recently the complex safeguarding team, and there's also the team that works with schools and parents to help keep youngsters from being excluded from school. And I wonder whether or not these two sort of things are actually helping to keep our young people out of the criminal justice system. Be grateful if someone could comment. Thank you.
I can comment in terms of the links between my service and those two services that you described. We do have a lot of overlap, because children known to the Youth Justice Service may well be experiencing exploitation, and they may well be excluded from school. In fact, I'd say the majority of the young people we work with don't have a full-time mainstream education offer. So establishing the right working links with those two teams has been a high priority in recent months, and our service has got resources that can help in those respects. So we've got an education officer with specialism in education provision for the kind of young people that we work with, to ensure that they're getting the right provision, and work with the child, with the local authority, with the providers to improve that. And they are now closely working with the inclusion team that you mentioned. And similarly, the complex safeguarding service remit, although it overlaps with us, they do work with a number of children that we don't have contact with. And obviously the model is designed to provide intensive support to those children, so that the exploitation stops and the risk of offending reduces, and they re-engage with education. So I think we certainly hope that's the design of the services, that the support from the complex safeguarding service to prevent exploitation, and from the inclusion service to reduce exclusions and improve education provision, should have the effect of reducing first-time entrants.
Great, thank you very much.
Thank you very much for that answer, David. I think Fizz, you were next.
Yeah, thank you. It was a similar-ish type of question, really. I was just wondering whether we had data regarding poverty levels and then people that end up in the youth justice system.
We don't track that specific issue. I mean, I think what we could overlay is the residential area where the young people that we work with is drawn from. So we can map that, and you might expect to see a correlation between our young people and areas of kind of greater economic need. It's interesting because we don't we do look through quite a few lenses. So I've talked about ethnicity in the report, and we've mentioned children in care. We also are very alert to special educational need issues, and we are, as a service, really alert to speech and language and communication needs, but we haven't got a direct way of mapping the correlation between contact with the police for criminal behaviour and poverty and deprivation.
Yeah, it sort of links in with a presentation that I saw about income inequality and the work that the Equalities Trust has done. And so income inequality would be another thing, but it's maybe a little bit more difficult to monitor. But generally, if we are able to even up incomes, then there is less criminal behaviour. And so if we're not measuring it, I'm just wondering how we're going to improve it. So yeah, maybe that could be added.
Thank you. Yeah, it's something we need to think about.
Okay, so thank you very much, Viz and David. I think I had Jane. I think you had your hand up next.
Yes, sorry.
I'll tell you what, you were on mute, weren't you?
I'll start again.
That's okay.
So I was thinking about the prevalence of mental health problems in young people currently, and thinking back to I think our last meeting where we heard from Elaine Hurl about some pilot projects in some Bournemouth schools about addressing the mental health problems of young people, and whether David would think that possibly the fact that those pilot projects are there, or that maybe mental health services are slightly easier to access than they have been in the past. I'm hoping that they are. Whether that has helped with keeping the numbers down a little bit, because I do think that some young people who get themselves into trouble have very challenging backgrounds and perhaps do have mental health issues.
There's definitely, you're right, there's a correlation between mental health, emotional well-being issues, and contact with the justice system and other problems. You may be aware that there's a children and young people's mental health and emotional well-being strategy for the next 3 years that's being finalised, which locates those mental health and school services at the one end of a continuum, if you like, providing hopefully the early intervention and therefore hopefully helping children stay in school, not have other adverse outcomes like getting in contact with the police. And at the other end of the continuum, you've got services like the Youth Offending Service and the Forensic CAMS service that are, we've got a psychologist, we've got CAMS nurses and a speech and language therapist working in a trauma-informed way to ensure that we respond to each child individually based on a really informed assessment of their needs, their trauma history and what that means for their current presentation, and which we would also aim to share with other services like the complex safeguarding service that are working with the same child. So it feels like there's a more coherent strategy coming together, and when those mental health teams in schools that you mentioned are a really welcome addition to it.
Yeah, I can imagine. Thank you. It's great. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you very much. Beverley, you have your hand up because you have a couple more points to make. I know I've got a couple of questions just to finish off with. So, Beverley.
You happy for me to go first?
I am, as always, Beverley, very happy for you to go first.
Thank you, Chairman. I just wanted to pick up on the black and minority ethnic points here, and I'm paragraph 11 talks about the percentages of black and minority ethnics represented in the offenders, and at the 24, the equality implications, you're saying that it's not, then there isn't an over-representation locally, but paragraph 17 talks about working together to reduce the over-representation. Have we or haven't we got an over-representation? That's my first question.
Could I respond to that now? Could I sort of add to that, because actually, Beverley, that was just one of the things that would which I'd brought in, and that we actually mentioned this to David in the past, because we got 11% locally identified as BAME, but 8% entrance. But this is slightly different to what we heard in the Youth Justice Plan at our previous meeting, and David had some good reasons that he explained to me. Now that exactly the same thing with the committee. Right. So we, believe it or not, I think exactly the same lines.
And I read the Youth Justice Plan. I went back and read it. So
yeah.
So I apologise that it is a bit confusing. The report does appear to be saying contradictory things. Hopefully I can clarify that for you. The first time entrance rate does not appear to show disproportionality, so that's reassuring. So it doesn't appear that young people from those ethnic groups are more likely to enter the justice system. However, one of the issues nationally, and we can see evidence of it locally, is that children from those groups may enter the justice system at a later stage. So they may be more likely to bypass the out of court disposal stage and come in at the court stage, and to be overrepresented in the groups that are, if you like, at the more punitive end of the system, so receiving restrictive community sentences, or our small numbers that go into custody. We do have overrepresentation of BAME young people in that small group that are in custody. So our worry is that when they enter the system, they progress through it either faster or further or both. And therefore there are still concerns that, despite our best efforts, and there's no, we're confident that's not an intended outcome, but it does appear to be the outcome. So we and the police and other partners are really trying to think proactively about what the issues are and how we can address them. And the LAMI report from 2017 is still really pertinent, and their kind of theme of that was about overrepresentation was explain or reform. So we need to be able to either explain or change what we're doing to change that outcome. I hope that's clarified it. I'm happy to have another go if that needed.
Okay, no, and that's about all the agencies being transparent, isn't it? And having their processes open to interrogation. And in fact, I've read quite a lot of the LAMI report, and it talks about the problem being compounded at every level with this overrepresentation. But the interesting thing that I read was, in fact, the Runnymede did a perspective which was criminal justice versus racial justice, and what they said was, when you removed, and Councillor Rice has brought in something really important to say race is not a driver for crime, but when you put in the age factors and you look at poverty and poor neighbourhoods, there's actually no disparity at all between crimes committed by black and minority ethnics and non-ethnic. So the questions are really, how are they getting, if there's no difference in the crimes, how are they getting there in the first place? I guess is that overzealous policing in certain areas. I don't know, and you probably can't answer that, but I think I'd like to pick up on Councillor Rice's point, because poverty and disadvantage is a driver for crime, and I think we have to try and establish those links and look at how we can feed that information back, not to be snoops into people's lives, but how we can help address that balance where poverty is the driver.
Yeah, I think the one of the issues that here is about cumulative disadvantage, and poverty is one of the factors. Access to services, engagement with education, the experience of family conflict, and so on. So there's quite a few different factors, and I'm aware that we use the BAME term and group those different ethnic groups together in a way that it maybe enables us to look at the issue and consider the numbers, but actually doesn't reflect differences between ethnic groups. And certainly if you look at education outcomes, it's a more nuanced picture than all minority ethnic groups having a similar outcome. So, and I think the same may be true in terms of the justice system. So, and because it is cumulative disadvantage, it can't just be a justice system response. So, for example, we might want to look at representation in terms of exclusions from school and whether those are proportionately distributed, as it were, or whether certain groups, perhaps including groups that experience economic disadvantage, are overrepresented there as well.
Yeah, Chairman, I think there's more work that this can do in actually trying to deal with some of the causes of this.
Yeah, I would agree. There's some quite interesting questions actually being raised here as to what is causing and what's affecting the data. Does anybody else have any comments before I sum up and see whether I can get the general gist of what we talked about here? No, I mean, you're going to have to excuse me because my pen ran out part way through. That's why I was fiddling in my bag trying to find a new one. So I've got a few faded notes here, which have so it's sort of about the data. We had some clarity about the rate, which I'm very grateful for. We had some clarity generally about whether what enters, what will actually be brought up on your DBS check, and we got some reassurances that these systems will less likely and mean that young people will be flagged on a DBS check. We were quite interested in looking at the data about poverty levels within the youth justice system, and to see whether that data corresponds, whether people who identified as BAME is actually due to poverty. I myself, I know labelling people is one method, but I'm not very into labelling. The people are people. It's some of them are poor people, some of them come from a different background, but each person's got their own story, isn't it? Although data can make a big difference. And we discussed whether the BAME representation meant that they were going faster through the system rather than more of them. And I feel that we would like to know a bit more information about that. So there's a few ideas there, I think, for you, David. And thank you very much. I think we found that very interesting. Now I must correct myself because I gave us the wrong number of the agenda for last time. I've had to scribble my my notes to renumber things. I think that was item 7 on the agenda. This is which is the determination of admissions arrangements for 2022-23 for maintained mainstream schools. So this paper is going to Cabinet. So we're looking at before the Cabinet. It's an admissions policy for maintained community and voluntary controlled schools. So I believe, Neil, you're presenting the paper. I'm just going to ask Neil, just at the beginning of your presentation, just for clarity, to make sure that we're all talking about the right thing. Could you explain some idea about what our maintained community and voluntary schools are, and how that differs to the majority of schools that we don't have admissions agreements to look at?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I'm happy to. So in relation to types of schools, which I'm sure many members will be familiar with, there are in BCP a large number of academies, and members will be aware of the academisation process that went on some years ago and is ongoing. And as academies, schools become their own admissions authority, so they set their own admissions policy. And that's also true of the voluntary aided schools, which are the schools that are historically run through church organisations as well. So that's why we're not talking about those schools in particular. We're talking about the maintained and voluntary controlled schools, of which BCP has 16. And so we, as the local authority, remain the admission authority for those schools. And so each year have to set the admissions policy as to how pupils will be admitted to that school, and should the school be oversubscribed, how we would decide which pupils are offered a place. So that's a very brief introduction to the admissions policy. We do this every year, so this is an annual report, and as the Chair rightly says, it goes on to Cabinet for sign-off. In this particular year, the proposed admission policy you have in front of you has not changed, so it's not been subject to further consultation because we're not proposing any changes in it this year, and so it's steady state. Just as a reminder, this is, as the Chair said, for 2022-23, so for admissions we're always working quite a long way in advance, as you can imagine, because obviously the admissions for the September 22 year start in a year in advance. In September 21 we open the primary admissions at that stage. So the policy, like I say, hasn't changed and is what's presented in front of you. Members will note, for example, that looked after children and care experienced young people are #1 in the priority list in terms of oversubscription, and I think that's what you'd expect as a corporate parent through the maintained schools, and is also reflected actually in many of the academies as well. The other item on the agenda is the coordinated admissions scheme, and so this is a scheme which enables parents to apply once rather than having to apply to each individual school at the main point of entry. And so we as the local authority have a coordinated admissions scheme, which means parents apply to us for a school place and they pick 3 or 4 priorities. We then liaise with the schools, and the highest ranking offer is then sent out as an offer, but we coordinate that on behalf of parents, like I say, so that they're not having to go to each school individually and have an application and get into a really confused situation where some parents might receive 4 offers and others none. So we coordinate that, and the paper you have in front of you just reiterates that we will coordinate the admissions on behalf of the BCP area. So like I said, not much change from last year, and members who were on the panel last year will all remember seeing it at that stage. No changes to the admissions policy, and just a reiteration that we will continue to coordinate admissions for schools for the coming year.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. Any members of the committee have any questions about that?
No hand, lower hand, up hand. Hi, just to say thank you, Neil, because I had a note about corporate parenting and about admissions to schools, and you've covered it. So thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. Sandra, you raised your hand.
Yeah, thanks, Chair. Yeah, if I could just ask a question, and I'm afraid I think I should probably know this, but I've forgotten it. But why for Hilbourne Primary is the distance from home to school measured differently from other schools? Just seemed a bit odd. Do you know, Neil?
Yes, it's a historic set of arrangements. As I say, we haven't changed, we haven't proposed any changes to the admissions policy this year. As you'll be aware, Hilbourne is not currently an oversubscribed school, so it's not a priority for us to address. We will be looking again at that in the coming year as we look at place planning and the other elements of that. But it is just a historic set of arrangements that we choose not to change because there's no need to, and it provides a level of stability for the school. But you're right, it is there are some oddities within the admissions arrangements, but they are historic in nature.
Yeah, thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Sandra. Fizz, you have your hand up.
Hi, yes, thank you. I was just scrolling through the paper. I read it this afternoon, and I can't find the bit that I was thinking about, but it was to do with applications to a different year group, in particularly at in reception. This is sort of mostly just coming from a personal issue in terms of August born, and was looking for him to be deferred, so starting in an out of year group, and at the time, this was 8 years ago now, no, sorry, 4 years ago, there was a lot of research suggesting that it was actually beneficial for children and parents to be able to have that option. And there didn't seem to be any reason why it shouldn't be enabled, particularly. And so the process just seemed a little bit heavy-handed in terms of sort of having various people agree to it, rather than it just being a simple preference. And I was wondering whether that could be adjusted, or any thoughts on that.
Thank you, Councillor Ross, for the question. just for the sake of clarity and for introduction, there are 2 linked items. One is deferred entry and one is delayed entry. So there is all parents have the right to defer entry and enter in the term before their child is 5. So that would be not starting at the start of the school year, but starting later on in the school year because they want to carry on in an early year setting or some other thing because they feel their child will be better prepared to go to school. So that's one thing, and that's an absolute right within the admissions arrangements. The other one is moving year groups, as you say, and that requires the sign up of the school and many views being brought into account. This is quite an ongoing debate about the usefulness of this, particularly the older year groups. I have to say, back yearing a child to allow them to have an opportunity. Have they been sick, for example, for some other reason, having missed a significant amount of school? So each case is looked at individually for that at that request. And the general approach has been not to approve that unless there are very good reasons to do so, because taking children out of chronological year obviously makes that more difficult as they go through through school, about the transition points and everything that follows on from that point. So the opportunity it does exist, but they are looked at on an individual basis as we go through the school years.
Yes, I can understand deferring or becoming out of year sort of when you're 14 is a significant decision, but I didn't think it was a particularly significant decision when you're choosing whether they start at sort of 4 or 5, because it's only a month difference between the children anyway, between a September born and an August born. I just wondered whether we could make the process simpler for just the reception children.
Yeah, I mean, obviously that flows through the system, and the regulations are that the children should be in school in the term before they turn 5, and that would be that term, wouldn't it? So it is, you know, outside of normal regulations, and so that's why there would have to be particular individual looking at each case. There has to be a real reason for it. I'm not sure I can say much more than that, really, other than the fact that that's how the regulations are applied, that children should be in school at the term before they turn 5, and there are exemptions, but they are have to be in a very particular set of circumstances.
So there isn't anywhere in the rest of the UK sort of where local councils are sort of saying that they're sort of they don't really mind either way for the summer born ones, because when I was researching it before, I seemed to get the impression that there was quite a lot of sort of support from educational groups saying that it's beneficial for children, particularly boys, so it's interesting to hear that there's a strong preference to not support that from yourself.
Yeah, it is, and Chair, without wishing to go off onto one of the many issues that you can pick up in relation to admissions, you know, the summer born issue, you know, and the link to this issue, you know, we track that set of children specifically for this reason, because they have a different set of circumstances when they enter school. And it is an ongoing debate about whether that's a desirable or not a desirable approach to be taken. So I think it is a very open and active debate, Councillor Rice. But like I say, in the regulations as they sit, there is an expectation of when children start school and the ability to flex that, but only when there is a particular and very clear reason to do so, rather than just their chronological age in entering school.
Can I just come in on the same point, Felicity? I'll come back to you. I just want to fix some clarity on this. If a child does go into a different year group at reception or year 1, when that does happen on the odd occasion, is it normally fixed that that child stays in that year group through the whole of their school career? And does that cause them problems, or rather their secondary reporting exam data at the end? And is that the reason why schools are quite reticent to do it?
Yeah, that's absolutely part of it, Chair. And that's what I was saying about the transitions. It becomes more complicated as you transition between schools, because as you come to secondary school as a 12-year-old, and the immediate admissions criteria would put you into a different year group than would be there. So you need the agreement of the whole school system to enable that to flow through, unless there was to be a missed year somewhere along the line. So it is very complicated. So when it is put in place, it generally is for a whole school career, but that is quite difficult to manage for many reasons, as you've identified.
Thank you, Neil. Sorry, Felicity, I cut over you. Would you like just to finish off? I just thought that might add a little clarity to what we were just talking about.
Yes. So it's I just wonder whether, if this is something that is educationally beneficial for children, for summer-born children, then is it something that we should be suggesting, well, actually, maybe we need a bit of flexibility here. And if there's an issue with sort of the children as they go through secondary school, just because of the automatic system of sort of, if they're 12, then they get, then there's a separate application form, or sort of they suddenly miss out on a year's education because they were, yeah, I'm just wondering whether there's any, like, we could suggest that we look at this and think, actually, educational advisors are suggesting that this is a sensible and progressive step forwards. Should we be looking at facilitating this rather than continuing to block it?
I think Simon would like to come in, Chair. Simon Mckenzie.
Yeah, I mean, so, all right, Chair. I will count one authority who had a slightly more flexible approach to the summer born. But when I arrived, it wasn't August or July or June. We were getting requests from February and March from parents to defer. And that's the problem, is where do you draw the line? And it has to be done individually. And there are, as Neil Riley pointed out and Chair pointed out, that there is an issue around secondary transfer, for instance, where the head teacher doesn't have to take into year 7, can take the child into their year group at that. Or if you're in a special needs special school, you wouldn't be able to go into year 14 because you'd be too old for their registration. So there are little knock-on effects. I do think, having my children by chance are July born, and they may have benefited, but it is, I do accept that there can be benefits, and the research does show there are. But where do you draw the line is the issue.
Thank you very much for that, Simon. I think Emma, have you got your hand up?
Hi, thank you, Chair. I did have my hand up actually, but Simon just said exactly what I was going to say, and that's where do you draw the line. I have an August born son, so as a parent, of course, we'd all like our child to be the oldest in the year, but you know, once we've put the July, August boys into the next year, then it's the May, June boys that are at the bottom, so to speak, and then we have the same argument from those parents wanting their children, and I think that just gets harder and harder for the teachers, because all of a sudden they're not teaching a 12-month chronological age gap, they're teaching a 15-18-month gap, and personal view, that's just not sustainable within schools.
Thank you very much for that. I think Nicola, you also had a comment to make.
Thank you, Chairman, very much for letting me come into this debate, which is fascinating, and I don't say when my son's birthdays are actually, but I think it's really interesting to hear the feedback. It is such an issue for some parents, beyond doubt. But just thinking in terms of the work of this panel, what you're actually scrutinising is the admissions arrangement for a relatively small number of schools in this paper. You know, you are looking at 16, and we have got close to 100. And just put that into context in terms of the scale of the school population, and that the vast majority of our schools are academies. And if the panel were minded to make any recommendations, you would need to know that in doing it in this piece of work, that it's only relating to a small number of schools, and if you want a wider discussion, I think it would only be appropriate to consider the whole school sector, because in that, if you don't, you leave out the interests of a vast number of children within BCP. So I'm really genuinely interested in the discussion that's going on, but in terms of the outcomes of scrutiny, I just kind of draw your attention back to the fact that this is in relation to a particular cabinet paper, which I will be taking through, and I'm very interested in your conversations, but this is about those schools. Thank you.
If I can add there, because my daughter was at the end of July, and she was born very premature, so she is somebody who could well have a lot better in a different year group. And I have also looked at some research of his looking at strange things like people in the top flight basketball teams in Canada, where their birthdays are, and their age and how old they are within the year makes a big difference. But I do agree, Nicola, that it is probably nothing we can do about it here, but it is very interesting to find out about it. So Fizz, is there anything else? You've been cut off twice here. I apologise because it's been quite an interesting debate. But do you have anything else to add before we close the discussion?
Just really that most people have commented that they do agree that it is beneficial for children, and so just to leave on that thought,
yeah.
And that the fact that it's maybe only making a difference to some schools, that we have more influence over those schools potentially. So that would be a reason to try and do something different.
So I would suggest in that case we note this discussion, and I will. I'm looking at Nicola there to denote it as part of what we say. I don't feel we can do anything about it, but I think maybe we should look at how we could do something about it, but that's for a future discussion. Just to sum up, we looked at the difference between the measuring from particularly Hilborn Primary School and other schools, and looked at historically why that is. But we had a lot of talk about application different year group and delayed entry, and which is quite interesting. But my question is, are we quite happy to recommend this to the Cabinet? I'm saying that we are, unless I see anybody disagreeing with that. Let's pause a minute and give people time to type if they want to disagree. I can't.
I would just say it because it's taking too long to type it. But I would like to just highlight that I would like to see some commitment to looking at the benefits of deferral.
Yeah, so we'll recall that in the minutes, Fizz, and we'll see where that takes us. In that case, it's agenda item 9 next. This is a Children's Services response to COVID-19. So this follows on from the report that we received at the end of June. And I believe Neil is going to present this item. Am I correct, Neil?
Thank you, Chair. I was only going to do a really brief introduction to this particular item because it's such a wide-ranging report. I think it would be for members to decide which areas, if any, they want to ask about and scrutinise in particular. The purpose of the report, which you'll see is very much in the format of bullet points, was to give an overview of all the activity, or at least a significant amount of the activity that Children's Services is engaged in to support the response to COVID across council, cross area, and with partner organisations approach. So like I say, it's really wide ranging and covers a huge amount of work that's been undertaken. And obviously this is a fast moving situation, and many of the members were at a pre-panel, pre-committee conversation about how we're going to take forward with covering free school meals over the Christmas and further holidays. And things are changing rapidly as we move on, and as we move into tier 2 and other things. The good news is that all our schools remain open, and we continue to support all our families to access school as effectively as we can. Our attendance remains high and higher than the national average. We currently, I think the figures I received today, have about 90% of our children are in school and attending, which is a really positive, and the levels amongst those children with additional needs also remains high. But our focus remains on those who aren't attending and how we can support them as well as possible. So, like I say, there's so much in this report that's covered quite briefly that I wasn't going to go through it in detail, but give members the opportunity to pick out items that perhaps myself, Brian, Elaine, or Simon could respond to give you more detail if that's what you would like. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much for that, Neil. I've got a couple of questions, but I'm going to ask one, well, make one point to start with, and then come to the rest of the committee, and then come back at the end. I was noting that all our schools stayed open for the duration, and I know in several authorities that wasn't the case. A lot of schools decided to join together. So I'd just like to say this highlights quite an achievement for the schools in this authority, and I'd like personally thanks be passed on to them for all the work they've done there, keeping the doors open for our children. I'm just going to have a look if anybody got any hands up at all. Right, I can see somebody. Jane, you were first.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Yeah, I'd like to look at item 42 about 1,000 laptops being distributed to vulnerable pupils. There were sort of horror stories in the news about head teachers who'd been promised, 50 or 100 and actually got 3. Did we have enough for our vulnerable children? What do we do if we didn't have enough? And what about households with multiple siblings? you know, presumably they had to share one, but I just wondered what the situation was with those laptops, please.
Thank you, Councillor Kelly. Yeah, I can certainly talk about that. So this was a government scheme that was launched to provide vulnerable children with access to IT. So it was laptops, tablets, and mobile internet devices, 3G dongles, those sorts of things. And we were really successful in this piece of work. We worked really hard in partnership with our schools, and were successful in, I think, 3 tranches of bidding for laptops as the pandemic rolled on, and those were distributed through schools and were, you know, absolutely delivered to pupils. So in the end, we actually had more laptops than were requested, and those additional laptops went to the virtual school and are being used to support our looked after and care experienced young people. That's also a credit to our schools, because many of our schools lent out their own equipment, and so this was used to supplement that pool of equipment, and it worked really well. We did get some feedback that that some of the laptops weren't doing what they needed to do, but in each of those occasions when we looked into it, it was actually about the Wi-Fi that was available or some other thing, and we managed to manage that. But as you can imagine, supporting 1,000 laptops is really quite difficult, you know, with all the different platforms that the schools used, and I think we worked really well with them. So like I say, at the end of just before the summer holidays, when the scheme was coming to the end, we didn't have any unfulfilled requests that we weren't able to meet. And like I say, we had a few left over that went into the virtual school and have been really positively used. So it was a really positive experience from a BCP perspective. The final thing I'd say is this does carry on. So if a school closes as a result of COVID, the government do give the school the opportunity to ask for more laptops. So we are continuing with this. So it was 1,000, I think it was just under 1,100 actually, up to the start of this term. But as schools have to self-isolate or whatever, we're supporting them to bid for more if they need them through the government scheme. So a success story, I think, in terms of our getting those out to the people who need them most. Thank you, Neil. And those children keep those laptops, do they? That's you know, they're now theirs. Is that the case? It is. It's their device. They're maintained by the school at the moment, and there'll have to be some handover process. But absolutely, it supports them all the way through their education. I think the view is, I mean, I don't know what the lifetime of a laptop is, probably 4 or 5 years, but once they've gone through their education, including university, if that's what they choose or some other route, they'd probably be on their useful life for schools to reuse anyway. And so I think it's much more pragmatic approach to say, absolutely, this supports your whole education journey, wherever that may take you. Brilliant, thank you.
Thank you very much for that question, Jane, and thank you for the answer, Neil. And any other hands to be raised here? What do you think about it? A couple of things. 43. I was intrigued by this. One college diverted students to care for COVID-19 patients. Can you just explain how that worked?
Yeah, so the college supported work to help those with COVID, and students were used to support that piece of work. And that was really effective in a safe and socially distanced kind of way, of course. But in support of their studies, they were doing work with those who had COVID and were self-isolating, and so they were supporting them in their homes basically, and taking things round and supporting them in any way that they could. And it was really, once again, a positive piece of work the college was engaged in, and students were able to work really positively with those in need.
Thank you for that, because I have seen experience of school children being very good at supporting vulnerable people, and both people getting a lot out of it. Lisa, you raised your hand, and then Sandra.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I was point 27, which is on page 57, about the link worker model deployed, and I wondered how that was, if somebody could explain how that worked.
I can do briefly. So at the start of the COVID pandemic, and as schools were responding to that, we were really keen to ensure that we had oversight of vulnerable groups being being in school. And you remember that over the summer term, it was vulnerable groups and key worker children who were in school.
Sure.
And so what we did is redeploy staff so that each school had a link worker who worked with that school to ensure there was sight of every single one of those vulnerable children that are identified as vulnerable within their school. So whether they were in school or not in school, there was sight of them, support was put in place for them, and schools were supported to make sure they got work and were supported for their general well-being. Like I say, that was made possible by the redeployment of staff from around all of children's services, and it was a really significant effort, and many schools really appreciated that. And I have to say, some would like to see an ongoing approach where there is a single point of contact. But we've moved to a different model now, which is a team around the school, and support is there but delivered in just a different way. But that's what the link worker was. It was somebody who had a really clear role within supporting schools to ensure vulnerable groups were accessing school, and if they weren't accessing school, their well-being was being looked after, and they were receiving remote education or whatever may have gone on that school.
And that worked out well, did it?
Yeah, we had certainly by the end of the summer term, we had a well above average number of vulnerable group children attending school, so we had a high level of attendance, and we had a good oversight through individual trackers of the children who weren't attending school and the support they were receiving, and that would have been through, early help or social work or the school itself, a whole range of professionals having sight of children who had needs.
That must have taken some arranging, so that's really good. Thank you.
It was a very big spreadsheet, absolutely.
Yes, I can imagine. Thanks.
Thank you for that answer, Neil. Sandra, I think you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, if I could just make a quick comment. Obviously, we've heard tonight about the Ofsted concerns, but you can see from reading this paper that many of our staff in children's are both dedicated and committed to supporting children and young people, and they've always worked really hard. And I think we need to remember that and get a sort of sense of balance in this, and we need to thank them for all their work. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for making that point, Sandra. This is nobody else with their hands up. It's just not. I've got a general one for the end. I mean, this COVID thing. Hopefully, we're never going to experience anything ever like this again. So it's strange asking what we can learn from it, because hopefully we won't have to use most of that learning. But I'm sure that some of the things that we've done during this pandemic has actually given us some improvements. So I'm asking, can we highlight anything that in normal times what we've done to help with COVID might actually make some improvements, and can we adapt any of those and adopt them for our return to normal?
Absolutely, I think we can, Chair, and it's a really good question. I think the first thing is to say schools' experience of remote learning has come on a very, very long way, and the ability to use systems like Teams as we're on today, whether that's Zoom or something else, they can do remote lessons, they can take work in, mark work, provide feedback remotely, and we're at a position now where schools can switch that on and off as groups of children need to self-isolate or those other things. My children are worried that there'll never be a snow day again because if it snows we can send work out. So that has been a real step change in what schools are able to respond to not having the children in school and supporting them to learn from home. I think that's been really important. The other thing I'd raise, I think, and I hope it showed through in the pre-committee presentation on free school meals, is the joint working across the council and with the third sector has once again come on a really, really long way about how we support families in a holistic way, understanding what a huge part schooling plays in family life, and how schools and all the other services across the council can work together to support them. And I think that's been really key as well. So they're just two things. I'm sure there are lots of others, but those are things that immediately came to me when you asked the question, Chair. And I think Elaine might want to comment as well.
Please do, Elaine.
Yeah, no, just to echo what both Councillor Moore and Neil have said about the staff staff resilience and the working, collective working, but not wishing to move away from the positivity. The other thing, and I do think this is learning, is it's highlighted the inequalities and the way in which we need to respond to the challenges for some of our families and children and young people, and that is something that we are in proactive conversations with our education colleagues. I would suggest, unless you have a different view, Neil, and it is being colleagues are open to those conversations. So in terms of being able to recognise and move on learning from learning in terms of how you have to be agile and respond in a pandemic, I think the fact that the recognition around what are we going to do about the inequalities gap for some of those children, young people, particularly around their exams, again, is collectively understood, and there is an absolute appetite to be able to ensure that we do what we can in order to provide the right level of tutoring and catch up for those individuals. So I think it's really important that we hold on to that learning as well. It really did shine a spotlight on what was required, and there has been a systems leadership response to it, which has been encouraging.
Thank you for that answer, both of you. And I would say, snow days or something. Never snow days again. Teachers won't get a snow day again, or burst water pipe day, or the heating not working again day ever. So it's not just I do feel for the teachers on that one. Beverley, I believe you got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. Do we have snow? I can't recall seeing much snow at all. Not like when I was a kid up north. Actually, yeah, a couple of things. You talked about what we might have learned that we can take back into normality. I recall when we had I think it was my first committee meeting, the virtual school presentation, and one of the figures there was that 1 in 5 looked after children wasn't in full-time education, and they were talking about the virtual learning there, and I think that we must have a lot more expertise now in how to do that and how to do it well. So I would actually like to see, Chairman, that at some point we look to see some improvement in that figure in looked after children. I'm just looking to see when it's coming up in the future, but I think with that expertise, we could hopefully help to drive that figure down. And I think the point that Elaine has just made is absolutely critical, because we've had to go out to children and to families, the inequalities and where people are disadvantaged is really glaring now in the face, and we can see it. And I think we also need to look at some courses of action, some actual pieces of work as to where we've identified those inequalities, how we're going to try and not eliminate them, but it's equity that we need to start to look at, how we create more equity to get those children at least on the first step. And I think that's something that we ought to look at following up as well. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much for those comments, Beverley. There wasn't really a question there, it was just a comment, wasn't there?
I think my question was that now that we have this learning around more learning about virtual education, we should look to apply that to children in care and look to see some reduction in those figures. So at the moment, it was 1 in 5. The last time I had 1 in 5 children were not in full-time education. I think we need to see how that learning can be better applied to reduce those figures down. So, yeah, I would like to see us apply some targets to bringing that down. And I would like to see us to look at identifying those inequalities in line with actually seeing what we can do about them, Chairman. We should be driving some work to help reduce those inequalities as best we can and create more equity.
Well, there's been a reminder that NEETs are coming to the February committee.
They are.
So that is something that we should have in mind when that comes, and maybe when we look at that report, we could ask to focus a little bit on what you was just saying.
Yeah, I just think we need to look at it. We've identified inequality. That the next step is, what are we going to do about it, really, isn't it? In terms of children, that's really the next piece of work.
It almost certainly is. Thank you. Has anybody else got any points on this particular agenda? No, in that case, it just leaves me to sum up here. We've talked about the number of schools that actually stayed open, that we're very pleased about that. The laptops, 1,100, and the fact that we had surplus and extra, which my feeling is have worked out very well, and a lot of people have benefited from that. We talked a bit about the link worker model, and we now know a bit about what it is and how it helps with vulnerable children in schools, linking a worker to the school to vulnerable children. The students helping with COVID, it was really interesting. The fact that the remote learning may well be what we've really brought out of improvements from COVID, and how we could use that in the future and help with needs and looked after children and getting more of them in education. I don't think I've missed anything particular from our discussion there. In that case, we're coming on to the penultimate, which is the forward plan. Just one thing, if you notice, the budget overview and budget shaping for 2021-2 was actually on the forward plan for this meeting. After discussions, I decided that actually it wasn't the right time for this. It was too early for the paperwork to be available for us, and the next meeting is unfortunately too close to the cabinet meeting on this, which is going to be a bit late. So my proposal is that we have a very focused, small working group to look at the budget shaping in sometime. Probably pre-Christmas, but that sort of time, and I'm looking for any volunteers to join me on that. I'm only looking for a few. I know some people were very interested in the budget in previous meetings, so people could either volunteer now or email me in the next couple of days. I'll be really pleased if we could do it by sort of beginning of next week. If not, I'm going to have to chase some people, because I have a few people in mind that I might like to co-opt into this. So if everybody's okay, anybody not happy with that, if you could type in now. No. Nicola, you have a comment to make.
Yes, and I wasn't going to volunteer to help you out.
No, I wasn't. Nicola, I wasn't going to allow you to help me out.
It was more about where that piece of work might go, and whether you've had a discussion with the chair of the Overview and Scrutiny panel about whether there's to be overarching scrutiny, as we did last year, of the budget, but for it to be driven by a subgroup of this panel seems like a way of doing both of those things.
It just so happens I've got a scrutiny panel board tomorrow, Nicholas. So I think things will join up at that point.
Great. All right. Thank you. I look forward to hearing what the outcome of that discussion is.
Do we have any other comments about the forward plan at all? I would add to myself, our forward plan is very full. We've got a lot of items on the next, and looking at just look at the next item, meeting dates. You've noticed that we've got put in to try to alleviate some of the pressure on the forward plan. However, there is a lot on it. Like Felicity, you just raised your hand.
Yes, I noticed that the childcare sufficiency review was on the forward plan. I had a planning application that actually included the current childcare sufficiency, a recent report. So it was quite interesting to see that this was on the forward plan. And I was just wondering whether any of us that were interested could get early access to that, to sort of really understand it in a bit more depth than simply coming to this group, because it seems to be quite detailed and quite complicated from what I can tell so far.
Okay, I'm looking at officers whether any of them can answer that question. Elaine, I see you are flashing on and off there, so I'm going to you.
So, Councillor Rice, we can have a meeting where we can go through the detail of it. They can be a bit difficult to navigate, so that's absolutely fine. We can do that.
Okay, great. And if anybody else wants to join me, then let me know.
Yeah, that would be super efficient, and we can set a Teams meeting up. Very happy to do that. And Neil and I are taking action to facilitate it when we get the request.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Eddie, I believe you raised your hand.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Chair. You might not be surprised, but item 15 and 16 on the agenda or forward plan. Yet again, I've raised questions on this over nearly 12 months, and we're still waiting for figures on the number of child exploitation and county lines, and also our children in care. It's almost 12 months since we had an update and figures. So hopefully by the next meeting in February, we'll be able to have some sort of update or figures, so we can relate back to 12 months ago and see where we are. Thank you.
Right, thank you very much for that, Eddie. I'll make sure we put that and I'll chase that for you to see whether we can get that data. In that case, this meeting dates, just please note that we have an extra meeting in February. So we've got a meeting in January and February, and say the meetings do look like these two might be quite long. So pack a flask and a sleeping bag just in case. And in that case, I'd like to declare the meeting closed, and thank you very much for your attendance.